Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. Welcome back. So today we're going to talk about Chapter 16, and what you really need to know about Chapter 16, just pardon me, I'm starting my timer, is that it is what it says it is, alternative visions of the 19th century. So to put this in context a little bit, what's going on in the 19th century, all right? So that's the 1800s. This chapter goes roughly from each side of the 1800s. All around the world. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is this capitalism and industrialization has changed everything. We talked about the Industrial Revolution last time, but now things have changed. The U.S. has started to grow into a powerhouse. This chapter starts before the Civil War, so that's in what we call antebellum America, before the war America. In the time between the founding of the country, the signing of the Constitution, and the Civil War starts in 1860. And then, but what else is going on around the rest of the world? So the chapter opens and it talks a little bit about what's going on in the U.S. So it talks about Native Americans, it talks about Sitting Bull, it talks about the ghost dance, and it talks about the Native Americans being first of all subjugated or moved to out west, and then basically their livelihood being destroyed, with the bison being wiped out, buffalo, bison, and also how the old ways suddenly were no longer sufficient, and modernization, you know, the white man in North America, the Americans, were taking over with the Transcontinental Railroad, mining in Colorado, all that other stuff. So that's how the chapter opens, and it kind of ends that way too with Native Americans. But really, when we get into the meat of it, it talks a lot about these alternative views, because people are starting to see industrialization and capitalism and the effects of it, and they don't like it because it makes the old ways less relevant. It starts to marginalize the old ways of doing things. And certainly in the three great Islamic empires that I know you remember, the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid, and the Mughals, or the Mughals, or the Mughals, however you want to say it. So that's basically Turkey, Iran, and India today. Those old empires are feeling the pressure of outside forces. So they're seeing military decline compared to Western military, okay? Because now you're seeing mechanized war for the first time with the Napoleonic Wars, industrial warfare for the first time. And so all of a sudden the old ways of warfare aren't sufficient. So the empires in the Middle East, the great Islamic empires, are no longer relevant, so they're scared. And basically what this chapter talks about is the reaction in Islam to modernization. So you're going to read about Wahhabism here, you're going to read about the Sufis as you go through here, Dan Fodio and the Fulani, all these. It sounds like a rock band, doesn't it? All these guys and all these new ideas are just stricter versions of Islam, because the leadership is seeing the corrupting influences of the outside world. So these new movements, as you read through them, are just the idea that people are cracking down because they're saying, hey, the outside world, the Western world, to be specific, the capitalist, Western, money-grubbing world of the West, us, we're no good. We're immoral and we're corrupting, and so we want our people to not follow you and to follow this stricter religion, if you will, these stricter rules. So that's kind of what's going on all through Islam when you read through this. And you're also going to read about something, and I can pronounce this, all right, but in Africa, all right, so you're going to read about charismatic military men in Africa and the Mefficaine movement, all right, Mefficaine movement. You don't need to remember it, but all it is talking about military strongmen and their tribes in South Africa as a response to modernization. Guys building armies independently and gaining power. So that's what that's about. Read this little gray box, Current Trends, in your books. It's real interesting, and it's interesting because this last sentence in this first paragraph talks about, well, actually it's not the last sentence, but it talks about this growing anti-European nature in Islam. And so I equate that to today. I'm making this recording on October 14th, 2023. By the way, I'll probably reuse this, but to put it in context, the war in Israel, the Israel-Hamas war has just started. And so, you can't help think about this anti-European, anti-industrial nature in the Middle East, sort of the old ways of some old radical Islamic people, for sure, but sort of the old ways clashing with modernization and liberalism and liberal ideas. And we're still seeing that today. So it's relevant. The chapter is relevant. So we go into China. We see the same sort of thing. And we talk about the millenarian movement. And also more relevant here is the Taiping rebellion. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is happening around the same time as the Civil War in the U.S. And again, it's really the Taiping policies are talking about this heavenly kingdom that exists, and the policies are, hey, no consumption of alcohol, no smoking opium, which was a big problem there, and what's it say? No indulgence in any sensual pleasure. So anything fun is bad in China at this time. And again, it's sort of a response to society getting out of hand, and we see it all the time. We see it today in some nations, and we see it today in our politics, all right, especially in 2023, where there's sort of this real conservative base that's, anti-abortion, versus the liberals. So we're always seeing this throughout history. It's not just the modern U.S., but you go back to China, to Islam, these battles between the conservatives and the modernizers, if you will. And I think that's a good way to look at this chapter. So then we jump into Europe. I'm at about 7 minutes. I'm doing real well. I think there's a couple of concepts that you need to learn out of this part of the chapter. So we're in this same time period, 1800s. The French Revolution has ended, but it didn't really end in a egalitarian way, in a sense, because Napoleon becomes a strongman. But besides all that, the first thing to take out of this chapter that you really, if you learn nothing else from the class, this word liberalism. All right, don't equate that to like liberals. I mean, it's true, but liberalism is more than that. It's the way like the entire Western world lives. And all it is, liberalism is a society that believes that people have rights, that they're worthy. That you can't boss them around like cattle, like happens in some countries. So liberalism is this idea that people have rights, and what comes with that are ideas about, gender identity and who you want to be and how you want to speak and how you want to protest. And, that can cause a lot of problems in society too. So liberalism is the way we live. We think it's the best way to live, but other societies don't like to live that way. They like to live under stricter regulations where maybe, women are kept at home and, kids can't learn bad things or whatever it is, but again, know what liberalism is. It's the way we live, and, we take it for granted, but there's a whole bunch of the world that doesn't know anything about it. You never learn that you have any rights. It's like you grow up to hate these people and that's what you go do. There's no love involved. So know what liberalism is. And as we get into this liberalism, we're going to start to read about a couple of people. So I don't know. I think you know what communism and socialism is, but the founding of that and how did that all come about? And that's all this reaction to industrialization, this idea that there are haves and have-nots. And there are visionaries like Karl Marx and John Stuart Mill and Charles Fourier that are saying, hey, this industrial world is screwed up. The guys that own the factories have all the power. The workers aren't taken care of. And that's sort of the rise of this utopian idea that all of us should be equal. We should all work for equal pay. All the pieces of the puzzle should fit together and everything should be wonderful. And that's what you call utopia, right? When everything works. Your Amazon packages are on time. They're free. You got a great job. You make the same amount of money as a CEO. Everyone's cool. That's what utopian society is. And that's what these people were thinking about, because they saw under capitalism that that's not the way it was going to work out. There were going to be professors that, that didn't make as much money as company presidents, and there were going to be nurses and doctors, and there were going to be these wage differentials, and people were going to protest and go on strike because they were going to get angry. And Marx and all of those guys said this isn't going to be a good thing. And actually, maybe in their day they were relevant. I mean, my graduate advisors, and in graduate school, so not that long ago, they were all Marxist thinkers. But what Marx basically thought, and the guys before him also basically said, and Marx it predicted this would happen, and he basically said, hey, the owners of the means of production, okay, the factory owners, they're going to be taken over by the workers someday. The workers are going to rise up, and the workers are going to own the means of production, and everyone's going to be equal, all right? That's what socialism is, and communism. We're going to live in these communal ways where everyone's going to fit together, everyone's going to be equal. And there may have been something to that theory in Marx's time, but I want you to think about something. And my view is totally radical. No one believes in my view. But I want you to think about something for a minute. When Marx was writing this stuff, the means of production, the guys he were talking about were factory owners. Well, in order to own a business in Marx's time, you had to have a ton of money, because you had to buy, the businesses were factories. They were big machines and big factories and equipment and production and all of this stuff. Not anyone could do that. You needed a lot of money and investors to get something like that started. So Marxism had some basis, because, the workers could never own the means of production. You or I could never buy, a factory and do it ourselves. But I think why it's not relevant as much these days, maybe it is, but in a different way, is because the means of production have changed. Some of the millionaires that are in our society right now are only making YouTube videos in their basement. They've spent, you spend $800 on a laptop computer, a good camera, and an internet connection, and you can become a star. Now, that's not for all of us, but again, the means of production, that idea, that's all changed. So, any of us have the means of production now, basically. So I think Marxism, I think it's great to study, because he's the first guy who predicted this is exactly how it's going to happen. And everyone since then has said, okay, see this strike at Jeep, that's the beginning of this. But, it doesn't really work that way. But it's an interesting read. There he is. All right, good looking guy. So read about Marxism, because that's a big part of what's going on. And surprising fact that Abraham Lincoln was interested in Marxism. They were living at the same time, right? So Lincoln was elected president in 1860? Yeah, 1860. So, he was in Congress 1848. So Abraham Lincoln actually wrote to Karl Marx, and there's a book about this, and nobody knows this stuff, but it's really cool. He wrote to Karl Marx. He was very interested in learning about Marxism, because he was interested in making sure that maybe the edges were taken off of capitalism somehow. Somehow you could, be a socialist, democratic, capitalist society. And Lincoln had all these ideas, and no one thinks about it because that's not what he's famous for. But Lincoln and Marx corresponded letters back in the day. So it's really cool, before the Civil War. That's the great part about history, when you figure this stuff out that no one knows about. So there's that. And then we opened my little lecture with Native American people and what was going on out west. And so there's more of that here. If you haven't been out west, it's an affordable trip for most of us, maybe a summer break, to just drive out to the Dakotas, with your car. It's about a 20-hour drive, but you can get a cheap hotel. Go out there and you can see some of the Native American, not only reservations, but also Sitting Bull and Wounded Knee and all of these areas. You can go check it out, and I think it gives you a new appreciation for what the Native Americans went through. And again, it's a reaction to industrialization, right? And a reaction to change. And here's a map. I think you'll see this one in your map exercise, and it'll give you some good ideas on when Native Americans were forced basically to move west. I'm at 14 minutes, so let me keep going through. More on the Native Americans here. And Mexico. So the Yucatan Wars of the castes, that end up in nothing other than death and destruction, because basically the caste system, is still the same way. Rebellions in India. Now this is rebellions against the English in the 1850s. So again, it's the Indians rising up, and the English were nothing short of brutal to the Indians. There's laws like the Salt Act where Indians can't even harvest their own salt. So read about these various things that happen because of imperialism and because of colonialism and because of encroachment of industrialists in the West and Europeans on old parts of the world. Okay, so Americans encroaching on Native Americans, the British colonizing India, so forcing themselves on India. And then we talked about change in the Islamic world due to influences from traders coming in. We talked about the Sufis and sort of those reactions to change in Islam. So that's it for this week. I went through the map exercise, so pay careful attention. And make sure you get a 100 on it. And if you're inquisitive, doesn't seem to be hooked up to Blackboard, let me know what your score is. And that's it. Lots of peace. Stay safe. And if you have any questions, let me know. Take care now. Bye-bye.